Hey, lighten up, jerk!
But I'm going to pose a question to you, Eric,
Okay.
and to you as well, Andy. But why do you think it is that The Godfather seems to be the more iconic film in Americana? Why do you think that's because there's constantly a ton of the references to it.
Mhm.
I mean, I was telling you before we even started filming that I think today, had you never seen The Godfather, you could quote a ton of lines from The Godfather, and you know The Godfather before you even watch it.
Yeah.
Why is that over Chinatown? Why do you think that is?
I think, in a way, Godfather, it's sort of the achievement. It embodies the American dream, and there's a kind of a cool factor to it that everyone sort of aspires to, especially guys. I think it speaks to guys a little more because there is that element of everyone kind of wants to be a gangster, and not a gangster,
right?
Like in
gangster
the traditional sense, but a gangster mentality. Someone who is respected, someone who has the power, someone
feared
who
and
achieves,
respected,
someone who comes from nothing, absolutely nothing, with no family, and builds an empire. And that's kind of the American dream, and I think that's why it speaks to a lot of people. And it's a broad stroke too. I think Chinatown is different in that it's kind of granular, kind of microscopic picture of, the same thing in a sense, but it's a little darker. And I think in Godfather, like we were saying earlier, it's unclear. I mean, it's clear that these are bad people in the traditional sense. But if you really look at them, they're actually really good. Vito's a good guy. He's noble. He has very strong character, strong family values.
Yes.
And these are all things that people aspire to. And people in society who may have been deemed good and not bad people may not come close to any of those qualities.
Right.
So I think in a sense, we all aspire or wish to be like Vito. And I think we also all have a bit of Michael in us, in a sense, where, like you said, they're very different.
Right.
And Michael is very different from Vito because Michael turns out to be very selfish. He turns out to be seeking power for the sake of power. Whereas Vito, he understood the nature of power and how it could benefit people around him, his family and then his community. Whereas Michael was just all about him. And if anyone gets in his way, he's going to kill them. And he ends up killing everybody.
Yeah.
And I think those two, the dichotomy of that is all in all of us, in a sense. We have a Michael and we have a Vito. Like, we want to be a Vito, in a sense. And I think that's what kind of speaks to, at least to me.
And I was thinking, like, with what you're saying too, is because the whole Godfather trilogy is really that comparison of Vito and Michael.
Yeah.
And they're really two sides of the same coin, because they both have power.
Yeah.
And Vito, is like, it's more, he does it more to protect and benefit those around him. Whereas, Michael is in it more for himself.
Yeah.
Although he fools himself into like thinking he's trying to do it to make everyone else around him better, but it really is about him.
Yeah.
And whereas, and I think Andy and I have talked about this, where you see where Vito is like, when he does end up passing, he's with family that cares about him. Like, he's with his fooling around with his grandson, and like it's kind of like he doesn't really die in anguish. Whereas because of Michael's choices, he ends up his lust for power ends up killing those that he cares about the most, and then he ends up in solitude and dies alone.
Yeah, you're right.
But I think what you're all saying is that that's why it does speak to us, because it's like that we could really go in both directions. It doesn't. We think that we are the Vito in the world, and we want those things.
Right.
But a lot of times, like, we're fighting the Michael in us and the selfishness.
Yeah.
And we could go kind of either down that road, and it's the struggle that we have as just man, as mankind. It's like it's tough.
It's tough. I think that's what it speaks to. Yeah. And Michael, his lust for power, he stopped at nothing. Right. I mean, in a sense, he killed his own family.
Right.
Whereas Vito, the power is taken away from him because he had limits. The Sollozzo deal.
Yeah.
That's a line he's not going to cross.
I don't want to deal with the drugs.
Yeah.
I can't do a Brando.
And because he did have limits, it ultimately became his downfall in a sense. But you're right too. Like maybe it's not a downfall. He didn't die alone. You know, he lost his son, one of his sons. But you know, he did, like you said, he didn't die in anguish.
Yeah.
You know, he died a very successful and very respected man. Yeah. Whereas Michael, jumping ahead to 3, he dies alone, all by himself.
So, Andy, what do you think? What do you think makes the Godfather, more iconic than like Chinatown? Because, like I said, I don't think Chinatown gets, it's not really referenced. Yeah, it's respected as a movie, but like it's not really like something you would see.
Mostly. Yeah.
I think just really quickly, I think the only quotable line from that movie is it's Chinatown.
Yeah.
And there's been plays on that. I think just thinking about it,
Simpsons.
Well, Simpsons
right away.
and then, Simpsons, and then I think there's all been kind of parodies and also kind of homages to it. I think there's like a episode of CSI where it takes place like something to do with actors, and then one of the characters, like the murderer basically gets away, and then the lead CSI he's like, oh, I'm gonna get her, and then like the cop is like, hey, forget it, it's Burbank.
That's funny.
And there's
Burbank's a whole different world.
Yeah, Burbank's
it really is.
It really is.
Even the cops are different there.
Yeah, it might be an 818 area code, but it's not the Valley.
There's also a great game on PS3 called LA Noire that kind of that embodies that Chinatown style of things too. Okay. And the way it ends is kind of that it leaves you unsatisfied as well. It's a great game. But yeah, continue, Andy.
But I think the reason why Godfather, is so iconic or resonates more because it's also philosophy. It's philosophy. It's a set of rules of how to live your life. It's like how do you acquire power? How do you make moves against your enemy? And so that way it's more able to be digested and incorporated into all facets of life. Especially for men, because men love. I think we're test case. We love this movie.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And there's not one part of that movie that hasn't influenced like how we live our lives in some form or another.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, I think philosophy is what makes what makes Godfather so iconic, so memorable, so beloved.
I agree with you 100% on that. In a way, it's like. At the sake of sounding sacrilege, it is almost like the Bible too, in the sense that you go back to the Bible for teachings. If you have questions, if you have struggles, right? Sometimes I watch Godfather and be like, dude, I'm having a business struggle. I don't know how do I deal with this client? And it's like, oh, okay, that's what.
But it's interesting because. Yeah, because like it's not a new Godfather is not a new story. It's it's about a good king. It's about a tyrannical king, and I think
it's a classic story.
It's a classic story.
Yeah,
and I think the reason why Vito is able to be a good king is because he's lived under tyrannical or evil kings his entire life, even from back in like when he was in Sicily. Yeah. Like his father and his brother were killed by like the local Don.
Right, his mother was killed in front of him.
His mother was killed in front of him by that same Don, and then he goes and he moves in this other place, and then there's another evil king, which like Don. I forget his name, but yeah, he lives under that evil king.
Don
Don Petticchio.
Yeah,
and
you're right.
And so he says he knows what it's like to live under an evil king. He decides to take upon himself to be rid of that king and become the benevolent king.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah.
I actually didn't. I love this. See,
yeah, Well, and that's where Michael didn't have that. Like he always grew up under the benevolent king, and then he saw that like the benevolence was the downfall of him.
Right.
And so I had to become the cruel man.
Right.
And I had to become the cruel evil king. To keep our family in power.
Right.